couple of directional pieces of information that we've gained from a lot of the analysts' research that we tend to do with these types of sessions. What's very impactful is the fact that if we look at all the things that LEAs are thinking about today, there's two things that really jump to the top of that whole list of topics of technology innovation. And of course, there's lots of things like body cameras, there's lots of things like GPS tracking, and all sorts of other things that relate to analytical views of data. But number one and two were very much around unified information platforms for sharing, for consolidation of information to create a search or some other insight into policing content. And then secondly, there was a huge emphasis on social media, which is the integration not only of ways in which police forces and organizations can communicate out, but also the way that they can capture in sentiment and other feeds from communities as well, so they can better understand the public are being supported. So this was a bit of research from the DOJ back in 2017, highlighting that these two areas were the most important that a lot of police forces should focus on. And here we are today, and more than ever, they are definitely some of the top priorities. And you'll see a theme in here. I'll let Ian jump in a second. But of course, of some of the things that Toronto Police were facing, a lot of it came down to how do we integrate all this information into a very useful platform.
That's right. From our side, we'd been planning to do that for quite some time, and it took us a while and a lot of, I'll say, failed attempts to try to get to where we are presently. And even today, I think we're just scratching the surface, which I'd expect a lot of organizations would be experiencing something very similar to that.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Now, to frame this contextually, people tend to think about, well, how do you approach something like this? Well, it all starts with, how do we get to the types of information today? And we're going to talk about this first off very quickly as to what it means to try and create a process where we can integrate information. But to frame this for the rest of the discussion, once we have an information model that's built from the integration of all these types of data, then we can do some wonderful things with it. And we thought we'd call this out up front as a way of really focusing people's minds on why we're picking some of the topics we did today, because they are really things that we can execute in a very short time frame, much more actionable insights around for policing today. And that's not just necessarily driven by the data, it's the way in which we can utilize that data to create a platform that really focuses on some really intelligent policing solutions that drive operational efficiency in different parts of a policing environment. And we've sort of picked on three here, but really what we're doing is we're leveraging an overall information model that we'll talk about in a technology which is, in this case, is ElusiveWorks Fusion or equivalent platform, that we then plug in different capabilities, whether it's search or machine learning or other types of insight technology, including things like natural language, so people can ask questions and be presented with really relevant content, and then link that to a very specific use case. So we've got person of interest 360, so how we look at individuals, we'll talk about that. A general crime search, which is to look at all of the resources in as both legacy and current perspective as to what it's like to go and deliver that type of facility. And then more insightful elements to do with the community, which could include social media as an input as well. So we picked up sort of three different application focus areas to frame this discussion. But what that means in reality is we start to look at the sort of stepping stones. There's some very practical views as to what the effort is in terms of scope. So the first one is unified incident reporting, and there's some directional content we'll get into in this area, but it's very much around legacy data sets, unified knowledge management, and how we think about that. And then there's compliance in the general industry as to what's driving that behavior. The second area is when we talk about a person of interest view, we need to understand everything to do with that person, but also maybe pivot around the data set. We're going to show you an example of a piece of technology that allows you to pivot from incident to person and then look and see recommendations made of where that person, in a particular example as someone that was arrested, might have actually been involved with other crime as well, just because of the dynamics that relate to that individual, where they're from, the community, the type of crime that's been involved, things like that. And other things that are indicators and recommendations around how we need to intervene. And then the third area is social and community, which is really understanding what's going on in the community, the channels that are being used, whether it's anything from Facebook to Twitter, or maybe it's even integration of new platforms like Patch or Neighborhood, and that really people promote and put comments on that often relate to crime. In fact, a town that I used to live in, and I'm based in New Jersey, in the US, nearly all the crime reported by individuals was on Neighbor, in many cases before they even contacted the police force, which is very interesting. So operational effectiveness comes from integrating those feeds into something that LEAs can actually utilize. Now, with the next step from this really is to think about how we can get operational insight from these three things. And it doesn't, although these are three primary focus areas, it doesn't mean that we need to treat them individually, because once we bring the information into an environment, we can do something with it. And that really is about process. So as people start to think about these three areas and what it means to go introduce something, then it always is about a process, and it starts with how people think about creating insight. So I know this is a bit sort of more to do with there's a view as to how people sort of maybe look at the technology, but it'll give you an idea of the stepwise type of elements that are involved in, as Ian was suggesting, bring information together. So first of all, it starts with understanding the silos of information that exist and how they can be brought together. Then it's about maybe looking at something slightly differently. And we're going to talk about a technology called indexing and inverted index type search that allows you to do things more quickly than, for instance, big data, data integration, or using business intelligence technology. Then it's about workflow. So how we link that to a particular scenario that links to some operational efficiency in a policing environment. And then how we can improve things like situation awareness, giving people the right information so that it improves officer efficiency as well as overall process. And then other types of insightful aspects that we can gain from that content that maybe we deliver through machine learning or some other type of analytics, for instance, related crime, related behavioral aspects, areas for operational improvement where we can make recommendations and so on. So this is a journey that really helps really characterize what not only police forces could go through, but also really what happens in general industry when people adopt insight technology.